My wife's sister accused me of ignoring her, then I exposed a shocking secret about her husband, and everyone panicked instantly. Hey Reddit, my name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and until last spring, I believed I understood the woman I married. The night everything started unraveling looked harmless on the surface. It was a Friday early summer, warm enough that the city had that low electric buzz people get when they don't want to go home yet. My wife Claire had insisted we meet her friends at a crowded rooftop restaurant downtown. She said it was just a casual dinner. Claire loved public places. She used to say they made her feel alive, like every moment mattered more if someone else could see it. When I arrived, the table was already full. Her sister Rachel waved dramatically, pulling attention our way. Two of Claire's coworkers were there, plus her closest friend Mira, who was already halfway through a cocktail and laughing louder than anyone else at the table. Claire kissed me on the cheek but didn't really look at me. Her attention stayed on the group, like I was just another chair being pulled into place. Dinner moved fast, the way it always did with her crowd. Constant photos, jokes that never landed quietly, everything performed just a little too loudly for the surrounding tables. At one point Mira raised her glass and said, "Okay, but seriously, Daniel still hasn't done it yet." Claire rolled her eyes in this exaggerated way that made people laugh before she even spoke. "Done what?" one of her coworkers asked. Mira smirked. "You know, the thing every guy is supposed to do." Claire leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, smiling like she was about to deliver a punchline. Apparently he's waiting for the perfect moment. The table chuckled. I felt the attention turn toward me all at once. It wasn't hostile, just expectant. Like they were watching a scene unfold. Claire tilted her head at me. "So, is tonight perfect enough for you?" The tone was teasing, but there was an edge under it. A kind of public pressure disguised as playfulness. I understood immediately what she was doing. She wanted a spectacle. For months, she'd hinted at it, dropping comments about public proposals she'd seen online, showing me videos where entire restaurants clapped and strangers cried. She said those moments proved how much someone was willing to risk embarrassment for love. I never liked those videos. They always felt less about the relationship and more about the audience. But I had already bought the ring weeks earlier. Quietly. Intentionally. I stood up. That alone made the table erupt into cheers. Phones came out instantly. Mira actually shouted, "Oh my God, it's happening." Claire covered her mouth, but she was smiling in a way that didn't look surprised. It looked satisfied. I took the ring from my pocket and knelt. The restaurant noticed almost immediately. Conversations softened. A few people nearby turned in their seats. Someone at another table began recording. I kept my voice calm. "Claire," I said, "we've built a life together for 4 years. I want to keep building it. Will you marry me?" There was a brief silence. Then Claire laughed. Not a small nervous laugh. A loud one. The kind meant to be heard. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, shaking her head like I just told a joke she couldn't believe I thought was funny. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, "you actually did it." Some of her friends laughed too, uncertain at first, then more confidently when they saw she wasn't stopping. Claire looked down at the ring and then back at me, still kneeling. "This is exactly what I told you not to do," she said. Her tone was sharp now, performative. "You think I want to be proposed to like some cliché YouTube video?" People nearby shifted uncomfortably. The phones didn't lower. I didn't move. Claire stood up from her chair. "I told you," she continued, raising her voice slightly, "if you ever proposed, it needed to be private. Personal. Not this attention-seeking thing." Mira chimed in, laughing. "Yeah dude, this is kinda cringe." The word landed harder than anything else. Claire folded her arms. "Honestly, Daniel, this feels more about you wanting applause than about us." A few people at nearby tables looked away, embarrassed on my behalf. Others kept watching like it was live entertainment. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, then closed the ring box calmly and stood. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't look at her friends. I just said one sentence, quietly enough that only our table could hear. "Okay." Claire blinked, like she hadn't expected the moment to end that way. She opened her mouth slightly, waiting for something, Maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, maybe an emotional reaction she could respond to. I gave her none. I put the ring back in my pocket, picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, and nodded once to the table. "Have a good night," I said. Then I walked out. No one stopped me. No one followed. The noise of the restaurant swallowed the moment almost immediately behind me, like a door closing on a stage. It wasn't until I was in the elevator alone that the silence hit. Not anger. Not humiliation, exactly. Something colder. A realization settling into place. Claire hadn't just rejected the proposal. She'd rejected it publicly, deliberately, with an audience. And she hadn't looked surprised when I knelt. She'd looked prepared. That detail stayed with me longer than anything else. Prepared. Like the outcome had already been decided before I ever opened the ring box. I didn't call her that night. I didn't text. I didn't ask for an explanation. Because as the hours passed, something became very clear. Whatever had just happened wasn't spontaneous. And if it wasn't spontaneous, then it wasn't about the proposal at all. The first thing Claire texted me the next morning was not an apology. It wasn't even a question. It was a correction. "You embarrassed yourself last night," she wrote. "We need to talk about boundaries." I read the message twice, not because it was confusing, but because of how predictable it sounded. The tone was clinical, almost rehearsed, like she'd already discussed it with someone else and was now delivering a conclusion instead of starting a conversation. I didn't reply immediately. In the past, that alone would have triggered a follow-up within minutes. Claire hated silence. She treated it like a problem that needed immediate fixing. This time, I left the message unread for 3 hours. When I finally responded, I sent only 2 words. "Okay. Sure." Nothing else. No question. No defense. No emotion. Her reply came in less than a minute. That's it. I didn't answer. For the first time in 4 years, I let a conversation simply stop. Over the next few days, I changed nothing outwardly. I still went to work at the same time. I still came home at the same hour. I still spoke politely when she spoke to me. But I removed something she had relied on so completely that she'd never noticed it existed. My engagement. Before, I filled every silence. I asked about her day, remembered details about her coworkers, planned dinners, smoothed over tensions with her friends. I handled logistics, emotional labor, the quiet maintenance work that keeps relationships stable. Now, I mirrored her energy exactly. If she spoke, I responded calmly. If she didn't, I let the silence stand. If she asked a practical question, she got a practical answer. Nothing more. At first, she didn't notice. Or rather, she noticed but misinterpreted it. 3 days after the proposal incident, she walked into the living room while I was reading. "You're still sulking?" she asked, dropping her bag loudly on the table. "I'm not sulking," I said evenly. She crossed her arms. "Then why are you acting weird?" "I'm not acting weird." She stared at me, waiting for elaboration. I went back to my book. That moment lingered in the air longer than any argument ever had. Claire wasn't used to conversations ending without emotional resolution. She was used to reactions, frustration, explanations, debates she could win or reshape. Calm for her wasn't reassuring. It was destabilizing. The next shift happened socially. A week later, Mira invited us to a small birthday gathering at a bar. Normally, I would have declined after what happened at the restaurant. Instead, I said yes. Claire seemed relieved by that, though she tried to hide it. At the bar, the group acted like nothing unusual had happened. Mira greeted me with exaggerated warmth. "There he is," she said, smiling too brightly. "The man of the hour." I nodded politely. Hey. No sarcasm. No tension. Just neutral. They expected awkwardness, maybe resentment. Instead, I treated the night like any other casual outing. I answered questions briefly. I laughed at jokes when they were actually funny. I ordered my drink, paid my portion, and didn't bring up the proposal or the rejection. Claire kept glancing at me throughout the night. Watching. Waiting for something that never came. At one point, Mira leaned across the table and said lightly, "So, no hard feelings, right?" Claire was just setting boundaries. I met her eyes calmly. There aren't any hard feelings. She blinked, thrown off by how easily I said it. Because it wasn't defensive. It was literal. I wasn't holding on to anger. I was holding on to distance. The difference mattered, even if they couldn't articulate why. Over the next month, Claire tried several small resets. She suggested a movie night. I agreed, watched the film quietly, and went to bed when it ended without discussing it. She proposed a weekend trip. I said, if you want to go, that's fine, but I didn't plan anything. She complained once, half-jokingly, you used to be more involved. I replied simply, I'm still here. The sentence unsettled her more than any accusation could have. Because it was true. I hadn't left. I hadn't threatened to leave. I hadn't demanded changes. I had just stopped participating emotionally beyond what was necessary. Claire started initiating more conversations, but they always followed the same pattern. You seem distant. I'm okay. Are you still upset? No. Then why does it feel like something's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Those answers weren't evasive. They were precise. And precision left no space for the kind of dramatic conflict she knew how to navigate. The tension began to shift from visible conflict to something quieter. Control. Claire had always controlled emotional pacing in our relationship, when conflicts escalated, when they resolved, when attention shifted back to her. Now, she couldn't find the levers anymore. One night, about 6 weeks after the restaurant incident, she finally said it directly. You're acting like you don't care, she said. I looked at her calmly. I care about what's real. She frowned. What does that even mean? It means I'm not reacting to things that aren't real problems. She stared at me, clearly expecting more explanation. I didn't give it. Silence filled the space again, thick and uncomfortable. That was when the dynamic fully flipped. For the first time, Claire began trying to provoke emotional responses deliberately. Small criticisms. Pointed jokes about how boring I'd become. Comments in front of friends, designed to pull me into defensive explanations. I responded to all of them the same way. Calmly. Briefly. Without engaging beyond what was necessary. No anger. No pleading. No visible hurt. Just steady, controlled neutrality. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something started to change in her behavior. Claire wasn't getting the audience reaction she was used to. Not from me. Not even from her friends anymore, who had begun to sense that the dynamic between us had shifted in a way they didn't fully understand. Her attempts to create moments were falling flat. Her jokes landed in silence. Her provocations dissolved without impact. Control wasn't slipping because of a fight. It was slipping because there was nothing left to push against. And that, more than anything, made her uneasy. Because for someone who thrives on public reactions, the worst possible outcome isn't anger. It's indifference. By the second month, I could see it clearly in her eyes during quiet moments. She wasn't angry. She wasn't satisfied. She was unsettled. Like she was waiting for a storm that refused to come. And the longer that calm lasted, the more obvious one thing became. She had expected the proposal night to create a story she could control. Instead, it had created a silence she couldn't shape. And silence, unlike anger, doesn't give you anything to argue with. It just waits. Until someone reveals why they needed the audience in the first place. It was a Thursday evening when I got the call that changed everything. The number was unfamiliar, and the voice that answered on the other end belonged to someone I had seen at the restaurant months ago, but never spoken to beyond a few polite words. It was Rachel, Claire's sister. Daniel, she said, calm and deliberate. We need to talk. Not now, not in front of anyone, just you and me. I agreed, meeting her the next morning at a quiet coffee shop in the suburbs. No witnesses, no distractions. She ordered a black coffee, stirred it slowly, and leaned back in her chair, the way someone does when they're about to drop information that matters. I don't get involved in family drama, she began, but what happened at the rooftop, it wasn't accidental. Not in any way. I raised my eyebrows, keeping my expression neutral. I thought Claire rejected me spontaneously. That's what it felt like. Rachel shook her head. It was staged. The whole thing. She planned it weeks in advance. I set my coffee down carefully. Planned? The public rejection. Yes, Rachel said. Friends coached her. Every laugh, every pause, every exaggerated sigh, it was rehearsed. She wanted witnesses, she wanted cameras, she wanted people to react. Your reaction wasn't even supposed to be calm, it was supposed to be dramatic, defensive, maybe even humiliating. They expected tears, an argument, begging. That's the script she wrote. I stayed quiet, just listening. That calm, the one I had spent weeks cultivating, had become the problem for them, without me realizing it. Why tell me this? I asked. Because I don't gain anything from your misfortune, Rachel said simply. I just thought you should know the truth. Claire is good at making public perception her ally. She doesn't care about people's feelings in the moment. She cares about how they see her controlling the story. I nodded, processing. Everything that had unsettled me, the predictability, the way she hadn't been surprised when I knelt, the fact that my restraint had confused and unbalanced her, it all made sense now. It wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was strategy. Rachel sipped her coffee and continued, voice level, factual. Mira helped. She coached Claire on timing, on what words to use. The restaurant choice, the timing of the laughs, even the way she made you pause before opening the ring box, it was all designed for maximum exposure. Maximum social embarrassment. The weight of it settled slowly, but not like anger. More like a quiet confirmation. Every instinct I'd followed, the restraint, the calm, the refusal to perform, had been exactly the right response. I wasn't just being passive, I was denying her the reaction she needed. So, every time I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't react, it destabilized her plan? I asked. Yes, Rachel said, almost matter-of-factly. She thrives on control. Public control. You not giving her that? It made her unmoored. And she hasn't recovered. You've effectively removed the audience she counts on. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing it. There was no vindictive glee in the knowledge. No desire for retaliation. Just clarity. You have to understand, Rachel added, she doesn't see this as personal. Not in the way you or I do. This is social currency. Humiliation, attention, applause, they're tools for her. You just refuse to play. I nodded slowly. And that's why the calm works better than any argument. Because I'm not giving her the tool she's trained to use. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Exactly. You're not her prop. And now that she can't manipulate you publicly, she's going to try harder. But she doesn't have the script anymore. That's why you're seeing this weird, tactical behavior. Everything she does now is strategic. She's testing, measuring, calculating. I didn't respond beyond a quiet, I understand. It was enough. Rachel gave me one last look, neutral but firm, then stood. Just remember, she said, what she did wasn't random, and it wasn't personal. She's good at this because she doesn't operate emotionally when she's performing. She operates like a strategist. Keep your calm. Don't give her anything to exploit. I watched her leave, then sat there for a long time, letting the information sink in. The pieces of the last few months clicked into place. The restaurant proposal, the laughter, the mocking tones of friends who were supposed to cheer her on, they were all carefully orchestrated to achieve one outcome: public humiliation. The subtle discomforts I had observed afterward, the deliberate, measured comments, the small tests of my reactions, her increasingly staged social behavior, were all part of the same framework. She was no longer just my wife. She was an architect of perception, and I had unknowingly denied her the audience she relied on. The insight didn't make me furious. It made me deliberate. I realized the advantage wasn't in meeting her manipulations with anger. It was in doing exactly what I had been doing, nothing emotionally reactive at all. In fact, that calm, which had seemed like passivity, was now a strategic counter. Everything changed after that conversation with Rachel. I no longer wondered why Claire acted the way she did. I knew she was strategic. She was a social manipulator at a skill level I hadn't anticipated. But now, instead of being confused, I was prepared. The restaurant humiliation was the opening move in a longer invisible game, and for the first time, I saw the board clearly. I wasn't a pawn. I wasn't expected to perform. I wasn't auditioning. I could let the next moves unfold on my terms, or more precisely, on terms where my calm was the only unpredictable variable. I left the coffee shop that morning with a quiet sense of alignment. Nothing had to be said to Claire. Nothing had to be argued. I just had to maintain the position I had already been in. And she would, inevitably, react. Not because I provoked her. Not because I insulted her. Not because I begged or fought or even explained myself. But because control was all she had, and I had taken it from her without lifting a finger. For weeks afterward, her behavior started to shift in subtle ways. Comments that once landed like hammers now fell flat. Attempts to provoke responses met only with a quiet, almost clinical calm. Friends who had laughed at the rooftop proposal began noticing her tension. Mira's coaching became visible only because Claire's reactions didn't match the narrative they had planned together. Even in public, she was calculating. Testing boundaries. Seeking a new script that didn't exist. And the longer she searched, the more she destabilized herself. Because the twist wasn't just the revelation Rachel gave me. The twist was that calm, sustained, and deliberate restraint was more powerful than any argument, any confrontation, any dramatic response. The quiet, the measured withdrawal of participation, had exposed the manipulation completely, without a word of accusation from me. Claire had become a strategic antagonist in the truest sense. And now the game was no longer about humiliation or attention. It was about exposure. And the audience, slowly, without knowing it, was about to see everything unravel. The afternoon Claire chose to stage her second chance scene was bright, almost aggressively cheerful. She picked the same restaurant rooftop where the first proposal had been, insisting the setting mattered: light, cityscape, cameras from nearby tables, witnesses walking past the glass walls. Everything about it was performative. She wanted an audience, and she had one. I arrived slightly early, carrying only my jacket and a quiet awareness that nothing about this encounter would be ordinary. Claire greeted me with the same rehearsed smile I had seen before. It was calm, precise, like a well-rehearsed actor about to deliver lines she had written and memorized. Mira was there, of course, hovering near the edge of the table, her expression smug, ready to support Claire's emotional spectacle. "You're here," Claire said, voice light but calculated. "Good." I wanted a moment where everyone could see what I'd been trying to fix. I nodded. "I see." She motioned toward a small gathering of friends and casual diners who had noticed us. "Exactly. You see, last time was unfortunate. Misunderstandings. But we can correct that today. I want the narrative to be clear." It was exactly what I expected, an attempt to rewrite history publicly, to reclaim the script she had lost. I said nothing. I simply sat across from her, calm, unmoving, neutral in tone and posture. "Daniel, I know you were hurt. I know you felt publicly humiliated," she continued, drawing out the words for maximum effect. "But I want everyone to know I didn't intend that. I care. I'm still committed. So today you'll see the real me." People nearby watched with curiosity, some whispering. Mira gave an encouraging nod. Claire's plan was to pull me into the drama, to evoke a reaction that would validate her performance. I remained quiet, my calm a contrast to her theatrics. Then she did it. She leaned forward, as if expecting me to react, and said, loudly enough for the small crowd, "Daniel, I realize I humiliated you publicly. And I want to make it right. So, will you let me propose to you this time?" The words hit exactly as she had intended. The tables were set, the audience was engaged, and she expected an emotional public response. Maybe an apology, maybe tears, maybe surrender. I looked at her evenly, silently assessing the entire scene. Then, without hesitation, I did the only thing she couldn't control. I accepted her invitation, not in her script, but on my terms. "Then let's do it," I said calmly. She blinked, the first visible flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She hadn't expected compliance. She had expected drama, resistance, submission. I stood, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a small, simple ring box. But instead of presenting it to her, I opened it and said, "Claire, I've been thinking. You asked for a public proposal. You wanted the audience. You wanted control. So here's your turn." Her mouth opened slightly, the performance faltering. Mira leaned in, whispering, but I ignored them. Claire's eyes widened as I held out the ring box to her, palm up, presenting the choice. You want a performance, I said softly but firmly. You want everyone watching. Go ahead. Propose. The crowd, realizing something unusual was happening, leaned in. Claire's hand shook slightly. She glanced at Mira. Mira's encouraging words were almost frantic now, but the control had shifted. The script she had meticulously crafted for me was now in her hands. For the first time, Claire hesitated, unsure of how to act. The role she had demanded of me, the groveling, the dramatic public surrender, was suddenly reversed. She took a deep breath, voice trembling ever so slightly, and said, "Daniel, I love you. Will you marry me?" It was awkward, unpolished, completely unlike the confident, rehearsed spectacle she had planned. The surrounding diners shifted in their seats, some whispering, some recording. She was exposing herself, not me. I closed the box gently, keeping my expression neutral, and shook my head. "I'm not auditioning anymore," I said. Claire froze. The words hung in the air, calm and unyielding. There was no anger, no shame in my tone, only clarity. The collapse of her performance was immediate. The audience, who had been primed to cheer or gasp, now watched her confusion and loss of control in real time. Mira whispered something, trying to redirect her, but Claire couldn't regain composure. Her carefully crafted persona had no ground to stand on. I folded my hands on the table. You wanted this public moment. You wanted to control the narrative. You wanted an audience. You got it. But I'm not the actor in your story. Her eyes welled slightly, not with triumph, but with the shock of realization. She had lost control not because I humiliated her, not because I yelled or insulted or exposed any secret. She lost control because I refused to participate in the play she wrote. The quiet calm of my refusal became more destabilizing than any confrontation could have been. It was nuclear silence, and she had no defense. I didn't wait for her to recover. I didn't add commentary, explanations, or emotional flourishes. I simply collected my jacket, nodded politely to the few diners still watching, and left. Behind me, Claire sat frozen, the ring box still open in front of her, a public monument to a carefully orchestrated plan unraveling. Mira's coaching had failed, her social reinforcement nullified. Claire's public persona, the one she had carefully curated for months, was exposed for what it was, strategy without substance. Later, when I heard whispers from people who had been there, some mentioning the oddness, the tension, the way she had faltered, it was clear. The performance she had counted on to rewrite history now confirmed everything she had tried to hide: manipulation, strategy, and reliance on spectacle. I never gloat, never pointedly comment. I simply exist in the clarity of my actions. And that day, the audience saw the truth unfold without me having to say a single unnecessary word. Claire had orchestrated the first proposal for maximum exposure, and she tried to stage a second one to reclaim control. She failed. Not because of public shaming, not because of clever words, not because of confrontation, but because I refused to be part of her performance. The exposure was complete. The collapse was real. And I left the rooftop knowing that control, the kind she valued above all, was finally out of her hands. I walked down the stairs quietly, leaving Claire to deal with the audience, the script, and the unraveling narrative she had so carefully constructed. And for the first time in months, I felt that rare, steady kind of relief that comes not from winning, but from refusing to play a rigged game. The story, finally, was no longer hers to control. The day after the rooftop collapse, Claire's phone started ringing immediately. Notifications flooded her screen, and she moved through them like a general responding to a battlefield report. Social media was alive with the snippets people had recorded. Videos of her faltering proposal, the awkwardness of her words, the silence when I refused to participate. Clips circulated faster than she could respond. She tried to spin it immediately. Her first post was polished, carefully worded. Sometimes life is messy, and misunderstandings happen. I love Daniel and wanted to share our story. Apologies to anyone who felt awkward witnessing our private moment. Comments poured in. Some supportive, many skeptical. Most didn't know the full context, but those who had seen both events, the original rooftop proposal and the second staged one, began piecing together the inconsistencies. I didn't respond at all. Not publicly. Not privately. Nothing. That lack of reaction became a statement of its own. People began noticing. A few friends tagged me in comments, expecting some kind of defense or explanation, perhaps an emotional outburst that would validate her narrative. But my silence remained absolute. Hours later, Rachel, Claire's sister, the same sister who had revealed the staged nature of the first proposal, posted a comment under one of Claire's videos. Calm, factual, neutral in tone. For clarity, the public proposal last year was planned and coached by friends to maximize audience reaction. Daniel's refusal to perform was never intended to humiliate. The outcome you see now is the natural result of that plan unraveling. The response was measured, precise. No blame, no anger, no judgment. Just truth. Once Rachel posted, the shift was immediate. People began revisiting the videos, side by side. The first proposal now looked less like a spontaneous romantic moment and more like a performance Claire had orchestrated. Her second attempt no longer read as an innocent correction. It was a desperate effort to regain control that had failed publicly. Fyra, who had coached Claire during both events, started receiving backlash as well. Friends and followers, once amused by her commentary and enthusiastic support, began criticizing her involvement. The small network of people who had enabled Claire's performances started unraveling socially. Invitations stopped. DMs went unanswered. Posts she made defending the original plan were met with pointed skepticism. Meanwhile, I maintained complete disengagement. No comment, no post, no explanation. Not because I was winning, but because there was nothing left to say. Silence, in this case, was more effective than any defense. Claire made one last attempt to control the narrative. She posted a long explanation of the events, framing them as misunderstandings and asserting that her intentions had always been good. The tone was defensive, overly emotional, and overexposed. Rachel replied again, concise, factual, calm. Intentions are not actions. Planning public humiliation does not constitute misunderstanding. Daniel's responses were consistent and measured. Observers can judge for themselves. The comments from mutual friends began to shift in tone. People who had previously sided with Claire now acknowledged the discrepancy between her intended narrative and the observed events. Even some who had remained neutral began questioning the authenticity of her posts. I remained in the background. I didn't correct, clarify, or engage. Days turned into weeks. Claire's social media presence became defensive and sporadic. Fyra, once the cheerleader of Claire's plans, posted less and less. Eventually, she went silent for almost a week, and when she returned, the reception was cold. Friends had stopped engaging, her credibility diminished. By this point, I had withdrawn entirely from any interaction. I didn't block Claire or her friends, I didn't post cryptic messages, and I didn't publicly gloat. I simply continued my own life quietly. For the first time since the initial rooftop incident, I noticed something I hadn't expected: relief. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but calm. Peace. The absence of tension that had built up over months settled over me like a cool morning fog. Claire never directly confronted me again. Her attempts to recreate drama, to reclaim attention, or to manipulate the narrative publicly all collapsed under the weight of their own exposure. Rachel occasionally checked in, confirming that the public now understood what had occurred without me needing to intervene. Truth had a way of asserting itself when not forced. Fyra, isolated socially, eventually removed herself from most of the shared social circles. The toxic reinforcement that had emboldened Claire's actions dissipated completely. I continued living my life in the quietest possible way. The city moved on around me, social media buzzed with other stories, and the memory of the rooftop incidents gradually receded from public attention. Not because they were forgotten, but because the exposure had removed their power. I didn't look for vindication. I didn't need it. The calm I had maintained, the consistent refusal to participate in the drama, had been more effective than any confrontation could have been. The relationships with Claire, Fyra, and the peripheral audience remained, but they had shifted. Where once there had been tension, spectacle, and expectation, now there was distance. Neutrality. Observation. And in that space, I found something rare: silence. Not emptiness. Not absence. But stillness. A quiet authority over my own life. A recognition that engagement is not always necessary, and that clarity and restraint can accomplish what words, arguments, or demonstrations of anger never could. I don't gloat. I don't boast. I don't make proclamations about right or wrong. I exist in the knowledge that I acted consistently, calmly, and without yielding to manipulation. That alone ensures my peace. In the end, the fallout settled into quiet reality. Claire's attempts to reclaim control faded. Mira's social credibility diminished. Rachel's truth stood without embellishment. And I, having refused to be a prop, a participant, or an actor in a manufactured story, continued living quietly. There is no victory to announce, no triumph to declare. Only the stillness after the storm, the calm after the upheaval, and the relief of finally being untangled from someone else's carefully orchestrated performance. Life returned to its natural rhythm, unobserved by anyone expecting drama. And in that silence, for the first time in months, I felt an unexpected peace. Peace without spectacle. Peace without explanation. Peace without anyone else's applause. And that was enough.